Well, hello, Gary. It's
Hello,
taken us a
Beck.
little while, but we're here. Wow. So this is the second of the series of interviews with people from Australia. Gary
Yeah.
is from South Australia, and of course I am in Brisbane. The WGINZ for under my name is William Glasser Institute New Zealand, because I spend most of my time in New Zealand, and that's my position in New Zealand as the president of the William Glasser Institute. And Gary's a registered psychologist. He's had various careers in education, in counselling. He has a master's in counselling, and he has recently made the transition from working full time to being retired. You want to tell us a little bit about that, Gary?
Yeah, all right. Well, firstly, I'm not a registered psychologist. I'm a registered counsellor.
Nice.
So, just to be clear about that. Yeah, I retired 2.5 years ago from education after a career in education for 40 years. And in that time, I suppose my specialist area was in the area of student management and working with teachers, working with difficult kids. That's where I finished my career. Um, And in the last 2.5 years, I've moved gradually more and more towards retirement in terms of not doing any paid work, but doing the things that I really enjoy doing. One of which is, as I've told you, is looking after my grandson on a Thursday, Henry, who's only 2 years of age. So, you know, a transition from work to retirement has been a really interesting experience for me.
Tell us
And
more about
yeah, the
yeah.
other thing, of course, is that I'm involved with the William Glasser Institute Australia, just as you're involved with New Zealand. I'm involved with the William Glasser Institute Australia, and as a senior faculty member, so I do some training, both within Australia and a bit overseas, and that seems to keep me busy. One of the important things I've discovered is learning to balance things. Not always striving to do things, but learning to balance and genuinely watching the time move by. I think it's a skill everyone has to develop in their own way and at their own age. And I'm certainly working very hard at doing it and enjoying it.
That's great. That's excellent. Yes. So, how would you define mental health and
Well,
happiness? How would you define those things?
I've always described it to people as, when we talk about choice theory, we have these 5 basic needs. Love and belonging, fun and learning, power, and freedom, and then there's need for survival and safety. And we talk about in choice theory terms about those 5 needs, sort of underpinning how we see the world, and we're constantly finding pictures in our heads and in the real world to satisfy how we meet those needs. And for me, mental health or being mentally healthy is about balancing those 5 needs, knowing that some stages you spend more time focusing on one need than you do on others. For instance, right now in my retirement, one of the things I'm focusing a lot on is fun and love and belonging, because I've got the time to help my kids out. I have 4 children. My wife Chris, who still works, I drive her to work in the mornings and pick her up in the afternoons, 3 or 4 days, sometimes 5 days a week. My grandson, as I said, I look after him. These were things when I worked, when my need for the income, and to a certain degree, the level of achievement and success, the sense of personal power, the power within of doing a job really well, has influenced me quite significantly through my career. But I've discovered that there are other ways to satisfy yourself, and that's one of the really nice things, is I think when we try to define what we mean by being mentally healthy, and that's how I talk about it, each of us has to define that for ourselves. I'm probably more healthy mentally in the last 2.5 years than I have been for a long while, because I'm not striving to do as many things as I did before. It's a bit like you wind up. I'm in my 60s, so I wound up for 40 years in a career and doing many things, and I've started to realise in retirement just how easy it is to just keep doing those things over and over and over, day in, week in, year out, and not realising that you are actually putting a lot of pressure on yourself that you call just the normal day-to-day routine. But it wasn't until I retired that I came to realise that, you know, it almost builds up and you can become unaware of it. And I think that's one of the things that happens to people a lot when we talk about being mentally healthy, is the pressures of day-to-day life just catch up to you. And you keep going and you keep going because we all want to do a good job at the things we do. And part of what can go wrong, I think, is a sense of satisfaction, as we talk about, of happiness in our lives, because we seem to be demanding so much of ourselves almost 24/7. So for me, it's about that balance. And I have to say this, and I'm really talking about personal experience. Some of that balance is learning to do nothing. You know, just enjoying a sunny day, going for a walk just because you feel like going for a walk, not because you're tired or it's part of your routine. You know, doing gardening or catching up with friends just because that's what you feel like doing, for no other reason. And I say that because in a working life, it's very easy to say, oh, this afternoon I have to do this and this, because if I don't do it this afternoon, I won't get to do it for 2 or 3 weeks. I think that's one of the big pressures, you know, on us all individually, and one that I'm sort of finding now is more balance for me. So I hope that's enough, Bette, but that's what it means to me, is finding that balance between all these competing needs.
Yes. And we put so much pressure on ourselves, and when you think about it, oh, after this things will settle down a bit, and then after this things will settle down a bit, and it's just that constancy of the whole thing. And I agree with you, Gary, that certainly is. So the second question that we had here was, what are your biggest personal obstacles to happiness? Is that something you want to share?
Yeah. I think, you know, happiness, being mentally healthy, one of the things we have to learn to accept throughout our lives, and I can't say it happens early in life or later in life. It happens for different people at different times. Some in childhood they realise it, others never realise it. But we have to come to grips with the fact that in order to be happy, there have to be unhappy periods in your life. You've got to know the difference, and each of us has to experience that. I think one of the things that in my work in doing training work with people is sometimes I think we strive to be happy 24/7 when I don't really believe it's possible to do that, because, you know, life gets in the way, different things happen. I have 4 children, and the number of things that have gone wrong with them over the years, from, you know, minor medical issues to problems in relationships to problems at school to problems with us as parents or me as dad, you know, running out of money when they're you know, didn't earn much when they were going to uni or doing training courses and that sort of thing. All these things build up, and you know, there's almost a sense of, I just wished I didn't have to go through this, and then I would be happy. Whereas in reality, one of the things we have to learn to embrace is the fact that our lives are full of unhappy moments. They're the things we're most aware of, is when we're unhappy. And part of learning to be mentally healthy, to be happy, is learning to say to yourself, well, this will move past. You know, it's not a good moment I'm going through at this time, but in time I will move through this. And I think happy people, as they move on in their lives, come to that understanding that, you know, all right, today's not a good day, or I'm not going through a good experience, but I will get through it. They have a resiliency inside themselves, and they begin to trust that resiliency, not to believe that they've got to do something to make it come, but they begin to accept, well, you know, I've got problems, that I will move past them at some point, and then my life will come more into balance. But also accepting that the balance will only last for as long as until the next problem comes along. And I think that's something that we sometimes lose track of, is the fact that you've got to go through the ups and downs of life in order to find out where your own sense of true happiness is.
Yes, yes. And Dr. Glasser, in his definition of mental health, talks about the fact that it's knowing something that you can do if you are in a down moment. They will happen. He says, nobody can be happy all of the time. But it's what you can do at those times to help bring back that balance in your life. Have you got any comments about that?
Yeah, and I think one of the most important things is that when you go through those moments, you have to have a sense that there are people around you who care about you. Now, in my world, that's my wife, Chris, and my 4 children, and my grandson. I have some very good friends, both within the Institute and from my days in education. People I've known, 2 people I've known since I was 16, 17 years of age, and I'm still friends with them. But when you're going through those difficult moments, I think one of the most important things is that you have to have someone around you who actually believes in you and, if you like, listen to your story without any judgment. I think that's one important thing. Equally as important, though, is, and I mean equally as important, is you have to have a sense of things you want to do in order to address the fact that you're unhappy. Now, for some people that might be walking or gardening or reading a book or a whole range of things that are not dependent on other people. And I think it's good if you've got people you can depend on and activities that you can do. If you've got both, I think fine. But I also personally believe, and this is my view, if you've got good activities that you really enjoy, you don't necessarily need to have people around you. Although it does help in our lives if you look at me as a 60-year-old, there are times when it's very important to have people around. But there are times when, good activities that I enjoy doing. I like to do a bit of sailing, a bit of fishing, especially with my son. Activities that take you away from the problem, I think, are really important. And sometimes that's enough just to have an activity. But sometimes also, and I don't know where the balance is, sometimes it's not an activity I want, it's somebody to listen to me or care about me. And I'm not sure how you define that, but I think both are important, but not necessarily is it necessary to have both of them working at the same time. I think those two are important. And there is one third one in my thinking, and that is, I used the word resilience earlier. We all have to learn in our own way that when problems happen to us, they help us to grow. They help us to mature as a person. And part of what we have to learn is to accept that when those problems do occur, there's a way through it. Now, sometimes that's very hard for people to do. Sometimes people can't do it for their whole lives because of a traumatic experience in childhood or, something traumatic that's happened in their lives. And, that's just the way it is. That's very hard for those people, and why they go to see good counsellors and therapists and so forth is to help them sort it through. But I think when we're talking about being mentally healthy, there has to be an acceptance that, life goes on.
Yeah.
And I have got problems, but life goes on and things will get brighter. But they only get brighter if you work at it. If you go for a walk, if you meet with somebody who's a friend to talk through, if you go and see somebody that who might help you with it. Our difficulty, as you would agree, is sometimes when we have problems, we tend to sit down and do nothing. And it's at those times that I think it's really difficult, because doing nothing changes nothing. Yes. So there's almost a sense that you need to be able to have strategies in your mind, whether it be activities or people to see, that basically can just help you move through these things. I hope that's a fair answer, Bette, but that's what it means to me.
Yeah, that's right. And so this is how you suggest people maintain a positive mental health and happiness attitude, because there is an attitude, isn't there? And
yeah, it's an attitude, and dare I say it, I don't think anybody on the planet has not had unhappy days or unhappy moments or events that have gone on for weeks or months that have made them incredibly unhappy, and by definition, to a degree, mentally unhealthy. But at the same time, you have to experience that in order to find the way through it. And that's probably what I'm trying to say here, is there's no such thing as I'm not a perfect person. I have some very mentally unhealthy days, depending on, some of the circumstances that you find yourself in. And I think, it'd be wrong for me to sit here and say I lead a perfect life. I don't. But that's part of what the game is the game of life is accepting that, am I going to be ruled by this problem, or am I going to try and choose to find a way through it, to actually say the problem's there, I can't change it, but I can change my response to how I deal with it right at this moment. You know, and it's easy to say that. In practice, as you would agree, Bet, it's not an easy thing for people to put into practice, to say, I can't change this, so what will I do about it?
Yes.
That can be really difficult.
Yes. You can know all the theory, and still there are times when it's just not enough, but it's staying in that state that is a mentally unhealthy place to be, and it's moving out. What are your how do you suggest people maintain it? I mean, we know that what we need to do, but what are the sorts of things? Our last speaker talked about keeping connected to people, but connected in a way that they weren't taking over and things like that. Have you got any other suggestions around?
Yeah. One of the things I talk to people a lot when I do training courses about, you know, being mentally healthy, is accepting that, you know, in your own head you have an inner voice. And I always get laughs from people when I say, and no one can sit here in this room today and say you don't have those voices in your head that talk to you. Because there's a sense out there, and, you know, it's stereotypical that, you know, if you've got voices in your head talking to you, you must be crazy. And yet, you know, we use words like the coach, you know, self-talk, positive self-talk, because I think we all have those little voices in our head that are talking to us about how we're performing in the world and giving us advice or giving us information. I talk about the twins. Now, that may be because I was a twin myself. My brother died in a car accident many years ago, but it's always been a metaphor that has been resonated with me. And when I talk about the twins and how we see ourselves, it's a bit like we have one twin that's the positive coach, the one that says, oh, you're doing a good job, you know, keep going, you'll get through this. Yeah, it's hard, but you've always gotten through. And then you have the negative coach, the critic, and that's the one that says, oh, back off, I don't think you should try this, this is too risky, oh, here it goes again, all right, oh, it's always you that pops it, you're always the one that gets left out. It's that voice that has a couple of functions, one of which is sometimes to warn us when we're in trouble, is to help us to understand, oh, look, maybe you're pushing a bit hard here. But sometimes that's not what it does. What we do is we hear the critic telling us we're not capable of doing things. And I often talk to people about, we have these two twins in our heads, and like any pair of twins, they're inseparable. We have to learn to nurture both twins. We have to nurture the twin that says, hey, you're a successful person, and constantly reinforces it, because we love to hear that. But we also need to nurture the twin that sometimes warns us if we're getting into danger, but at other times is very critical of our attempts to do things. And when I say we have to nurture them, we have to understand that if you want to be mentally healthy, you've always got this dialogue, if you like, going on between these two twins. And part of my job in sort of managing my twins, as hard as twins are to manage, well, that was my experience growing up, is you have to learn to listen to both, is to nurture both. Not to say one is more important than the other, but to realise that both twins are trying to help you sort things out. You know, the positive twin, it's easy to take the advice from that twin or hear the message. The negative twin, sometimes you've got to actually learn to talk to it in a way that allows you to balance, yeah, this is tough, this is not an easy thing I'm doing, but at the same time it's something I'm going to keep persisting with. Because the more we talk to that twin in a calm way, I think the more there's a sense of feeling like you're in control of it, and that dialogue with that voice is not one that's dominating the dialogue with yourself, but is one that's actually helping you, and sometimes helping you to define boundaries, but certainly not putting you in a position where you begin to doubt yourself, and the moment you hear that voice say, oh, you can't do this, you've already decided. That's the hard thing, I think, and when we're mentally unhealthy, and this is my experience now, it's because I've often listened to that negative twin for too long. I'm hearing it loud and clear, and the positive twin, that positive voice, I can't hear it.
Right, okay. So that's certainly a very powerful strategy for people when they're thinking about themselves and what they really want.
I think so, but it's also, you know, being mentally healthy, there's nothing magic about it. It's just life. And you know, we all struggle. Some people struggle more than others, you know. And do you ever reach a point where, you know, you say you're just living a perfectly normal life and you're mentally happy and everything's perfect? I think we go through periods in that, and I'm sure there are people who would probably say yes, there are, just as there are people who would say, oh, I've never had a happy moment. But right through that spectrum are people at all different levels. And, you know, we talk about choice theory, having choices in our lives. No one can tell any other individual what it means to be mentally healthy. We can give them suggestions or do summits like this where we talk to people. But I think it's important that people understand that, you know, being mentally healthy is also about learning to cope with all the different pressures that come on us on a day-by-day basis. And, you know, it's an ongoing dialogue that we have to have both with ourselves but also with people who are close to us. Or if we haven't got people who are close to us, sometimes being a counsellor, having somebody to talk to who has no real personal connection to you. You know, happiness is something I think we all strive for, but happiness is also something that can elude us for long periods of time in our lives.
Yes, for sure. What other things do you do in your training that would be helpful for people to look at?
Well, one of the things that we talk about when we do training is that we have this quality world where we have pictures in our heads of the things that are important to us, the things that motivate us. And sometimes those pictures that we have in our heads are so big that they overwhelm our ability to achieve them. To give you an example of that, a personal example, I like sailing. I have a little sailing boat that's 20 foot long. That's about 6 meters. You can't stand up in it. It's got a little cabin, but it's all right. It's a very small boat, little trailer sailor as we call it in Australia. In my 20s and 30s, and probably before that, and probably my 40s, that picture of a yacht was 40 foot long. You know, with a big steering wheel, and it was something I strived for. And for all sorts of reasons, it never happened. And one of the things I had to learn through my life, just in terms of that, is that I like sailing. Now, if I can't have the 40-foot boat, maybe I can have a small boat. All right, that's within my means to achieve, and that's what I did. And I'm very happy with sailing that little boat. If I had kept in my head a picture that said the only sailing boat I want is a 40-footer and I won't buy one until I get it, I'm going to be a very unhappy sailor because I will never achieve it. Now, if we think about people in general, some people won't buy a house until they feel they have enough money to buy the perfect house that they want. Some people say, I'm looking for a perfect partner, and have a picture in their head of what they think a perfect partner is and keep looking for it. And I think that's fine, but if you are continuing to look year after year and becoming disappointed, maybe one of the things you have to look at is whether the picture you have in your head of what you want is actually unrealistic, and do you need to change it? Now, no one can tell you to change it, but often when we're unhappy, it's because there are pictures in our heads of things we want. I mean, I often do activities with people. I say, well, what's your favourite car? And if there are 20 people in the room, there are 20 different cars. You know, there are 20 different colours. And I say to people, what's your favourite meal? And they do the same thing. And, you know, on and on it goes. We all have different pictures in our heads of the things that we want, and in our real world, the world outside our heads, we're constantly trying to find ways to match the real world with what's in our head. But if you can't get it in the real world, and you keep wanting it in your head, then you're going to get unhappy, or as we talk about, your scales tip. Yes. And you become unbalanced in terms of the perception you have in your head of something you want that you can't get. So I often talk to people about one of the things you sometimes have to do is put different pictures in your quality world that can satisfy that need. So, for instance, one of the things for me was I got very interested in sailing, in looking at racing and that, because I had been involved in racing. So when I didn't have a boat, I took an interest in that. It was a nice substitute picture all right, in terms of the picture I wanted, but it wasn't good enough, all right, because I wanted something more than just thinking about sailing. I wanted to do it. And so later in my life, after my kids had grown up, I bought a boat, because ultimately that's what was need satisfying for me. But as I said, if I had have kept that picture of a 40-foot boat in my head, it had never happened, and I'd be a very unhappy people. And I think often people keep pictures that are, you know, to them are the pictures they want, the things they want in their life. And then when they can't get it in the real world, what do you do? You know, and I think that's one of the real dilemmas with people who are unhappy is if you can't get what you want, then you've got to make a decision, a choice about, well, what can I get in order to satisfy it or get part way to where I want to be? There's no such thing as the perfect picture. There's no such thing as the perfect life.
No. And that's so true, Gary. At what stage then, and was the realisation that you weren't going to match that 40-foot yacht picture, at what stage did that happen, and what was the process that you went through? Was there anything?
Well, that's one picture, all right? And I'd say sailing meets my need for freedom, a bit of power, achievement, doing those sorts of things. I met Chris, my wife. I then had 4 children. I developed a career. And so one of the things is sometimes when we can't satisfy one picture that's important to us, we focus on other pictures in our lives. In my case, as I just mentioned, my marriage, my relationship with my wife, my relationship with my children, my work career, and my career in counselling and training with the William Glasser Institute, different pictures became important for me. And so I didn't just have to focus on that picture about sailing, and that's why I could, you know, read books and look at race tactics and that sort of thing and feel content, because I had shifted that picture aside, if I could put it that way, in my head, and other pictures for a large number of years have become very important to me. All right. But because it was an important picture, at some stage I knew I'd have to come back to it. So I think one of the things we often do is we learn to focus on other important things in our lives, and that helps us to move on. And again, I'd just like to say, sometimes people can't do that. You know, they become very focused on one picture or a series of pictures of things that they want in their life. And no one can tell you not to do that. That, you know, there is no formula or no book that says this is right or this is wrong. The only formula is, if you want it and you can't get it, are you happy or unhappy? All right? It's as simple as that. And if you're happy and you haven't got it, carry on. Obviously, you've figured out ways to do other things, and while you can't have whatever that is you want in your head, you've worked it out. If you're unhappy because you're saying, I've wanted this for years and I still haven't got it, then the question you have to ask yourself is, how much longer do you want to be unhappy?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It's as simple as that.
That's such a powerful question.
It is. And it's a very, I believe you've got to be very respectful when you ask questions like that to people. You know, how much longer do you want to be unhappy? Some people take that as can be really offended by a question like that, because there's an implication they're not trying to do things. They're not trying to change things or match the picture they have in their head of things they want. But at the same time, you're the only one. It's your life. You have to figure out, do you want to continue to be unhappy, or do you want to start saying, maybe there are other things I need to do in order to balance this unhappiness? Right? No one can tell any other human being to stop doing something. All you can do is give them information to help them to try and understand that. You know, I've seen it in relationships a lot, where people say, oh, you know, when I met them, and they were perfect, so they had a picture in their head in their quality world, as we say, of a perfect partner. And then 2, 3 years, 5 years into the relationship, the picture changes, because the person is now something different to that ideal picture. All right. And as I've often talked about to people in relationships, the most important thing you have to understand is that when you enter a relationship, in your head is a picture of what you want that relationship to be. And with your partner, in their head is a picture of what that relationship is. So if I hold my hands up, I can see them on the screen. It's a bit like each person has a set of needs, and they come into a relationship. And they each have different pictures about how to meet that relationship in the way that they want. What we have to do when we relate to other people is figure out how we actually overlap, and we create a new picture which says the relationship, our partnership, and then say this picture is one we share together. Now, I've seen couples who can't do that, who keep wanting the picture they want in their head. I've seen parents with children do it. I've seen it in employment situations where that happens, where people want to have a relationship, and it can be a relationship with a partner, a child, people you manage and so forth. But what they don't understand is that in order for that relationship to work, you have to work on a common picture of what it means to be in that relationship together and come to agreement about what that is. People often can't do that. And unhappiness in relationships, I think, is often because people have the picture of what they want and the other person has the picture, but one or both of them are not prepared to say, but, you know, what do we become now in terms of a relationship together?
Yes.
I think that's really important. People struggle with that.
So can you talk about that in schools just briefly? We've got a few minutes left, but in terms of relationships in schools and when you were working in the school.
Well, you know, if we go back to Bill Glass's choice theory, he often talks about, you know, at the centre of everything are relationships. And usually when you find an unhappy person, you can look at the relationships and you'll find that there are factors in there that may say there's a relationship they want to have that's not working perfectly, there's a relationship in the past or even in the future that's not working as perfectly as they want. When you talk about schools, but I would talk about families and places where people work, where there's, you know, leaders or managers or whatever you want to call it, it's really the same common denominator, and that is that one person is saying, I'm not happy with you because of the way you behave towards me, and the other person is saying, I'm not happy about you because of the way you behave towards me. And so instead of, I can see my hands, instead of them saying, look, I would like the relationship to be close, you know, because you're a teacher-student or principal-teacher or you know, mother with a child or father with a child, we often go, this is the picture I have in my head of what I think this relationship should be. So here is my picture. If you come closer to my picture and match it, everything will be okay. And the only problem with that is it presumes the other person is prepared to give up everything in order to satisfy what you want in your head. That's the problem. Is that at what age does a child learn to say to themselves, I don't want to do what you want because I don't like you? And I had discussions with groups of people and education and you know, most people say it happens very early on in life, in the infant, that you begin to learn there are some people I like and there are some people I don't like. And I think the most important thing that people who work with children have to learn is to trust them and respect them. I think that first and foremost is the most important thing. But I would also say very strongly that in a relationship with another human being, whether it be a marriage or a friendship or whatever, that sense of respect and trust is there in equal amounts. So it's not just in the school setting, it's in any setting that you have to learn to have a connection with the people that you want to care about and who you want to care about you. It sounds simple in one sense, but I think it's very hard. And it comes back to this notion, we're talking about mental health. No one would say, I would never say that you're not responsible for your own mental health or being mentally healthy, all right? But I'm the only one who can say, you know, I'm working in this school and I have to work with this group of kids, and I want to have a good time with them, but I'll only have a good time if the kids do it my way. My work. All right? If I want to have a good time with a group of kids, I have to be able to say, how do I get on with these kids and how do I relate to them? I think that's first and foremost the most important thing. And we hear that resonating in relationships at home also, in the workplace, is that it's not about what other people do, it's about if you think a relationship is important, what are you prepared to give to it? All right. And I think that's probably the key, and the hardest thing in schools, but I would say, as I keep saying, in any environment to do, is to say, if this relationship's important to me, how much will I give? Not how much will you give, but how much am I prepared to give to make it work?
That's right, yes. So, just to sum up, we've got a few minutes left. What would you like your audience to take away from this interview? What's the essence there?
Well, you know, we talk about mental health, but I prefer the notion of being, you know, healthy mentally, because there's a connotation in that you are doing things for yourself. And I think that's one of the important keys is if you want to be mentally healthy in your own life, you have to find people to relate to. And if you haven't got those people, as I said before, you can have things that you enjoy doing. Animals, for instance. A lot of people would say they relate to their animals. And they see that as just as important as having people to relate to, and I think that's a fair thing. You know, it's not for me to judge how other people want to live their lives, but it is important that we all learn to have relationships with people around us, and we also need to have a range of activities that we're able to do that give us a sense of balance, of being able to do things for ourselves. I think that's probably the most important thing in this whole equation, is we have to accept that if we want to be happy, we actually have to make some conscious choices about activities or the people that we mix with, as difficult as that might be for people to do at times. And of course, it's one of the reasons why, you know, having the ability to talk to people who are not close to you, people we call therapists or counsellors or group workers or whatever you want to call it, can be so important for people. To help them try and get the information necessary to make some changes. And the final thing I want to say is being mentally healthy, it's not a struggle, it's just life. It's not something that suddenly arrives on your doorstep. It's something we all work through our whole lives. And do you arrive at that destination? I'm not sure that you do. But my view is, at this age in my life, is that everything's brought me to this moment, and it's not about what I've done in the past, about whether that's made me happy or successful. It's what I'm doing now as I move into the future. I can always be happy about where I go from here, right? I don't have to dwell on the unhappiness that I may have had in my life earlier, and let that necessarily anchor me in things that I can't change because they're part of my past. As difficult as that is. And probably the last thing I would say is that difficulty, the more you have it, the more you need to find someone to talk to. Someone who's close to you, yes, but if you haven't got that, somebody you can go and talk to, because that's the job that they do in the community.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you, Gary. I know we had difficulty at the beginning getting on line, and a few scales were tilted.
So it's a bit
problem, but we got it right, and so I'm just delighted that we were able to have this discussion, and for me to hear and for you to share with the whole world who are listening your views on mental health and happiness. And I think that that's been amazing. I'm going to put up a screen share of the next session, which is a pre-recorded session. So when you're ready, you could just hang up, and I'll put that screen share on, and then we're ready for the next session that will be coming up at the top of the hour. So thank you so much, Gary, for being part of this.
No worries, Bet. And it's been a pleasure. With a bit of anxiety in it, but has been a pleasure. All right, I'll switch off now.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
So that's the next session. It's a pre-recorded interview with a Malaysian gentleman who I am really looking forward to hearing. That's the YouTube link that you can go to view the interview. You have that link in an email that was sent to you with further instructions. And then after that, you will be able to come back here and watch the next scheduled interview. So thank you very much for being part of this. Until next time.